Welcome to Curious Coaching, the Sport Northern Ireland podcast for coaches who are driven to explore new ways, thirsty for new ideas, and passionately curious about how they can maximise the power of sport through great coaching. The podcast that seeks not to answer coaching questions, but to provoke them.
Hello and welcome to the Curious Coaching Podcast. This is the fourth episode in our series around coach wellbeing, and we're really pleased to have with us today Jenny Coe, who's done a lot of work in this area, and we've spent a bit of time with her this morning. Really excited about the conversation that's going to come up. So, Jenny, you're very welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about you, your background in sport, and how you've ended up working in the area of wellbeing in sport.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, a long journey. How far back? When I was 6, no, I'm joking. I had an experience in Irish dancing and swimming from a coaching perspective, or at least as an athlete at the time, was completely contrasting. And it wasn't until I got into the basketball space that I realised that I enjoyed the sport more. I enjoyed being around other people. And I thought the team aspect was what the driver was, but actually it was the environment the coach was creating. Now, since then, I'd met more coaches and more ways of coaching and connecting. And that brought me into coaching, the playing side of basketball. So I played for, it was probably about 20 years, 15 international. And then as soon as I could, I got into coaching. So I was in, I think it was just after my junior cert, my GCSEs, I said, I'll go and coach in that gap year that we had. Now, if we saw any footage, thank God social media wasn't a thing at the time. It was horrendous. I was doing a copy and paste on other coaches I'd seen. So I was really autocratic, and fear and public humiliation, all of the stuff that had been done onto me as a player, I was just copying that and doing like, you know, this is the way we're going to run the session, drill it in over again. But unfortunately, with the success and ego being attached to it, the success being winning, we won, and we won lots. And so I kept doing it for a little bit longer. So I got a fascination with how can I, at that time when I was 16, 17, how can I take what I'm learning from my own sport, traveling around the world, around the country playing, and bring it into coaching. And unfortunately, do the opposite to what some of the coaches at the time were doing to me, or how I was experiencing it, or to my teammates. So coaching is there for a really long time. I don't think I understood fully what it was, or the definitely not the knowledge that I have now about the layers of it and the intricacies of the people interaction. But yeah, it was a lot of international coaching, different age groups, grassroots, then into the teaching environment. What does it look like in primary schools, and what does sport look like in primary schools, and what kind of experience has the teacher had that's impacting the coach in there, which led me into a job in UK coaching as a coach developer. And I was probably doing the coach developing thing, just not with the title, for a really long time, inviting people into the environment. Once I got over the ego piece, or I say ego, really, it was just inviting people in, learning, knowing that if I shared and was vulnerable, that I could grow as a coach. And then I got a job after the coach development, brilliant, loads of experience, loads of different sports, into West Ham. So it wasn't as a coach, it was more around performance and well-being, but essentially like coaching the coaches, a little bit of coach development into sports psychology, well-being. And that was when I realised that all of the stuff up until now, definitely have an interest and a passion for sports psychology and coach development. But if we don't have the well-being right, we're at nothing. And it was when I went into West Ham, it kind of brought back a lot of the experiences I'd had in UK coaching. Traveling around the country, hearing coaches talk about struggles and workload, and a lot of stuff that we would associate with burnout. And I just thought, God, this is a really sad space. And then started to zoom in. So did some courses. I'd put it on my title in the role, because I wanted to be held accountable. I wanted us to have a strategy. I wanted it to be a positive place to work, even though at the time, you know, people go, how are you going to make this a positive space? It's professional football, and we're doing a lot of copy and pasting from the men. So yeah, that's a little bit of a whistle stop tour.
Brilliant. It's eclectic, but definitely a really strong thread through it all. And definitely that bit about an organizational approach and trying to create a system that supports coaches to be well is definitely what we're keen to dive in today.
So just to take that back a layer, Jenny, into wellbeing, the theme of this series and the theme of this episode is around coach wellbeing. And I'd be really keen to know, do you have a definition for coach wellbeing, or how would you describe what coach wellbeing is to anyone who's listening?
Yeah, there is so much out there. I think in a very simple form, it's feeling good and functioning well as a real easy baseline and an easy check-in point for people. From the well-being work and studies that I've done, you can go into a psychological well-being, and you have the hedonic and eudaimonic. And without going into the layers of that, it really kind of gets people to think about the kind of situational stuff, the quick hits, and then the sustainable longevity piece of it. So the everyday stuff that's less subjective. And the eudaimonic stuff is very similar to the threads of self-determination theory. So the eudaimonic would look at environmental mastery and autonomy and relationships and that connectivity and belonging, whereas the others would be just the subjective kind of quick hit.
So brilliant. In terms of that overall picture of coach wellbeing then, one of the things we'd like to discuss today is how organisations approach coach wellbeing. If I had to ask you now, which I'm going to, how well do you think organisations, and we're talking about, say, governing bodies, national sports agencies, clubs, anybody that deploys coaches, how well do they prioritise coach wellbeing at the minute?
From what I know, not very much or well. And it is a broad pain stroke, but it's just not on the agenda. It's a tick box for some. So we know it's there. We need something to happen. We'll run a course. We'll run some education. Will we get to know our people a little bit better? Yeah, probably not. Will we get to deploy something that takes time and support it over a long period of time, invest in it? Maybe we'll put a wellbeing manager in there, or someone who has that kind of title but does 8 other jobs, like a coach manager who's also going to do wellbeing. So I don't think they do. I think that's probably harsh, and some organisations will be trying really hard, and I don't want them to feel deflated. But it needs to be high on the priority list, really high, and it just doesn't make sense that it's not.
And if we think about it, it's probably a pretty new phenomena. In that, for a long time, the thought about care for the coach, well-being for the coach, it didn't really come into play, even though we probably knew that coaches were experiencing a lot of challenges and continue to experience a lot of challenges.
Yeah. I was thinking as you're speaking there, all the different coaches over time have just slogged away years and years of work, and just in the office recruiting and selecting and deselecting. I'm thinking team sports because that's where my mind goes to, but I'm sure it's similar across lots of sports, demanding schedules and sociable hours, losing touch with why they started in the first place, feeling hooked in from a grassroots perspective because it's parochial, community based, and you don't want to say no. And it's an interesting one because he's making me think about whether we had a label or didn't have a label on it. It was always important, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And a lot of the problems that would have been there years ago would have been caused by a coach or an assistant coach not speaking well to a player, not giving feedback, not helping them understand the environment, not creating an environment that was thriving or supportive, or the high challenge, high support matrix, or it was all about fear and that public humiliation, you are not doing this and get on the baseline if you don't do this, or the punishment way of working, So how much of that was what the coach wanted to do as a coach and had seen other coaches do? How much of it was learned from movies, as Colin talks in the Care and Coaching? How was it learned from movies, be it Hollywood or others? And how much it was attributed from their own personal life, that they just didn't have an outlet, or they didn't have someone to talk to, or they didn't have someone to check and challenge their practice, or they weren't communicating with the players, so they didn't know how they felt. And the players were just those empty vessels. So you made me think about a lot there.
And you likewise, you have made me think about a lot. The need to support coaches and ensure well-being has always been there, it probably didn't have that label. And it's something that I suppose has came to light a little bit more in recent years in terms of how we might manage that. If I saw a sporting organisation that was doing this really well, what would I see?
One that wasn't putting the responsibility on the individual, one that could acknowledge that it's our responsibility and then the individuals. I think it's a see, feel, hear kind of thing. So what am I reading in the documentation, the language, the vision and mission statement that supports this holistic approach to maximising potential, be it as a coach, an official, a player, an athlete? I think you'd see that there'd be adaptations in the system and how they run the sport. Not saying that everybody needs to do a complete revamp, but looking at scheduling, forward planning and thinking about the next step of the sport and what the needs of the individuals are. Ones that kind of check in with their people, know their people. I've worked with sports who would maybe be nominating coaches for programs, and when I'd ask the coaching manager, like, what are they like? What do you would they be excited about the program? Why have you chose them? And they were like, oh yeah, like a generic answer. I'm like, and it's so naive of me because I know they're as a manager or head of coaching or PD, they have a lot of responsibilities. But if you don't know your people on the ground, how are we maximising and supporting the individuals that we're working with? To then, if it is in a pathway or a podium potential or on that kind of Olympic trajectory, to maximise the potential of the individuals, like to get them to enjoy that experience and not in like a false way. I'm not saying that like professional or Olympic or like high performance sport is easy, but there has to be an awareness that like if people are not enjoying it, there's going to be a breaking point, there's going to be a clash, and there's going to be just moments that somebody in that environment is really struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about the opposite of that in terms of what we might see in an sporting organisation that doesn't prioritise, well, you're probably going to see some unhappy coaches and coaches who are stretched and burned out. Going back to that, what barriers do you think exist in relation to, challenging sporting organisations to create that healthy, holistic environment for coaches?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It really made me think when before we talked about the coming on the podcast, I was thinking of barriers, and I think money can be one, and I don't really think it's money from a money, we need more money to do this. I think it's how we prioritize the money. Yeah. It's sometimes the desire to get more money in, and then what do we do with this kind of small pool of money? How do we prioritize, allocate? I think it's sometimes ego and status and those kind of things. I keep saying ego, I don't know why I keep referring to that. Status, and how important it is to present a kind of a facade that we're doing okay, we're doing well, don't let anyone know in the background we're struggling, so we won't invest in this and we won't have a campaign. Lack of awareness is another one. So I was thinking about organisations who are just blissfully ignorant that this is happening and not doing health checks, not knowing your people, not producing in a preventative way, having resources, education, support structures, mentorship programs, not having any of that in place and not realising that it's needed. I think there's something about how we measure success. So it kind of links in with the status piece I was talking about, like we're striving from here, so it's just another 3 years, 1 year, another season, keep going more and more. So, and that links then to, I think, the gatekeepers. So you have some of those people in the organisation who are nervous about change, who've been in there for 20 some years, and it's trying to find a balance to work with them to make the change so they don't feel threatened, don't feel like you're swooping in with a wellbeing strategy. This new employee comes in. But yeah, how can you incorporate all of that? And instead of like there are barriers, we can't do them, having a little bit more of the what way can we work it? How can we take some of them and break them down?
Brilliant. Thanks, Jenny. If we were to switch across then to thinking about the coach and coach wellbeing, coach burnout, what do you think are the big factors that are contributing to burnout within coaches as we stand at the minute?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. I think there's some easy ones that, from personal experience, you can go to. I think it's demands of the sport, from a systemic point of view, demands from an organisation, a structural point of view of how the sport is run, what the expectations of the sport are, what the expectations maybe on a global stage of coaches in general. So where some people, particularly during the COVID period, had their environments reduced to workforce constraints and whatever. So coaches ended up picking up more responsibilities and the workload got bigger, and then you're in the door, so you just kind of do it, and maybe they don't have the confidence to up manage, and maybe that person, their manager, is hitting roadblocks as well. But I think there's this growing, like, you need to have a little bit more knowledge about more things. So some people who've been in the sport for a really long time have been coaching that same way, or they've not needed to upskill a lot. And now there's lots of person-centered and representative practice and skill acquisition, all new, well, not new terms, but terms coming in that make coaches go, I need to know more about that, I need to know more about that. And so a lot more learning, a lot more awareness, which absolutely rightly so we should have. But then you add what they were doing around strength and conditioning, and they were doing their bit of nutrition and their bit of psychology, and setting up for the training session on their own because they don't have an extra hand. So all that traditional stuff that they needed to do is now on top of all this extra bits and pieces, and maybe the managing some finances and membership and recruitment and parents, and they're the buffer then between parents and some other people in the environment. So there's just a whole lot of expectation there, and not a lot of support in a lot of environments, for one reason or another. So yeah, and I think possibly the journey the coach has been on as well, when we say support, is there, and I know I have a lens from a coach developer point of view, but is there an opportunity for them to pause at any point? Do they pause and take downtime? Do they have a family, don't have a family, reconnect with someone, build relationships, enjoy time away and time out that's real downtime? So all that kind of building into workload, passion, all of those stages of the burnout that you kind of get closer and closer to burnout. Sorry, not stages of.
No, and there's definitely, I can even hear, as you're explaining there, I can sort of think in a performance environment, but also in a participation community type environment, those expectations, or the breadth of what we're expecting people to do, it's expanding probably in both of those environments. Just it's different, it looks different, but I guess that, this burnout can happen to those who are working full time maybe in a performance environment, but equally in a club, in a voluntary community environment. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it might look slightly different, or our perception of what like workload might look like is not it's just not a one shoe fits all. So there may be more awareness or education around pathway or higher performance environments, because some of the coaches are full-time and paid, and we must protect them and support them as employees. But you think, as you were mentioning, like the grassroots and early kind of pathway stages, lots of volunteers doing lots of hours and just don't know when to say no, or who to say no to, or how to say no. And then they might think, oh, well, they're doing coaching 5 days a week, I'm only doing it twice a week. But then it's the little bits in between. Who's coming to training, who's not, who's washing the kit, who's checking a facility, who's doing safeguarding, who's following up on something, query from a parent, all the admin stuff. So that those are not just a quick text message, like those are meaty documents, admin taking care of people. And I think that can fall on the coach and maybe one other in an environment, and you're kind of pulling on favours from people. And yeah, it's definitely a consideration, because sorry, again, to go on, like some of the people in grassroots don't have like clubhouses, or they don't have, they might be going out in a lake and doing some kayak, and they might be going off somewhere out in a pitch somewhere, but they're not having a base, so visuals aren't up on the wall, and they're not hosting education workshops in there. So they then have to use their personal time to go online to watch a webinar. And so it's all building in. I know that's very bitty, but I think it's definitely a consideration and a focus point, so that the sport then, as those players go through the system or go and enjoy their sport, they don't all have to go in one direction, but they can have a positive experience, and then that has a ripple effect.
And no, totally. And the in terms of identifying signs then, as somebody who's maybe managing or deploying coaches, or maybe just somebody who's around coaches, what are the types of things you think we really should be looking at across any environment then where coaches are operating for signs of burnout?
Well, I was thinking of the different stages earlier on that was leading up to that. So I think from a kind of a stage process into burnout, and then maybe I'll go into the more specific things that I've experienced myself. So if you have the initial enthusiasm of joining an organization, a new role, a new team, a new season, and having that kind of recharged feeling, and then the workload might start to build up, or perceived pressure might come into your environment. Then there's the emotional and physical exhaustion, and how that weighs down, and how you might have to find your ways of well-being at this point that work for you, and the boundaries that you might set. Then increased stress, decreased performance. There might be moments where the team, the individual, yourself are not performing as well. And I think this is something also in organizations people can look out for. Like, not just are the results not good, but as a collective, what am I noticing across? So has the performance drop? Is the behavior changing? So detachment and cynicism, like, am I hearing in the language that they're not connected with their job? The passion has faded a little bit or a lot at this stage. Lack of personal fulfillment. I'm completely not looking forward to going there, not feeling energized by this role that I once loved. And then also why am I not enjoying that? And then the overthinking leading to burnout. And it's a real serious consideration to get to that point, because you're personally, and if you're coaching as a job professionally, but it's affecting your home life, your other work environments. And it's having somebody in that environment or in your network that can help you identify these or notice something. So when I was talking about the kind of smaller pieces, well, they're very big pieces, but pieces that fit into those stages, it's not going to be linear. It might be over a certain period of time, different for everybody. But what are the workload boundaries that you can set? And easier said than done. Like, how many to set your boundaries and don't contact me in the evening. Oh, okay, I'll answer a call. How do you reset them and revisit, and what are the non-negotiables, and how do you have conversations with people so they're very clear of what we're working with here, not what I'm working to, what we're working for, what works with everyone, so somebody doesn't feel like they're losing out. And it's that, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, sitting writing this New Year's resolution to myself. I said, I read it somewhere. It was, when I say yes to somebody or something, I'm saying no to something else. And it was me I was saying no to. I was, missing the gym, missing time at home with my friends, all of that to do yes for other people in a work capacity. I was like, this is not working. I need to be part of the yes sometime. So finding a way to say no, not feeling like I was leaving someone down or I was going to lose out on an opportunity or a chance to be validated for something. So all of those, meeting people's expectations, but together. So it's kind of two-way.
Brilliant. And I get in the back of my head, as we've been doing this series, a little bit around, it's all around coach wellbeing, burnout. I've been thinking also about there's those people who are around you who can notice changes in your mood and your behaviour and those sorts of things, and those people can be really helpful. And then there's a point at which actually there's some professional support needed around those people. So I'm wondering if you might offer a little bit around, at what point do we need to start looking around us for others who might be able to offer some professional help around that? Yeah,
I definitely think there's still a stigma around that. And if we talk about therapy, counselling, coach development, mentoring, having your peer group, having something in an organisation, if you're lucky enough to be part of that has an employee package care, private healthcare, something like that makes things financially kind of sound or accessible. But any of the stages of those, people should be regularly thinking about that. We think about going to the gym and working on our physical health, our mental health is so important, and it's changing in different environments. It's challenged in different ways. Society puts loads of demands on us, and it's hard to ignore them. We're a marketer's dream this day. Every click they're looking for us to stay awake longer or buy this or do that or look what this person has and all this comparison stuff. So I think it's really hard to pause and go, right, I've noticed something's happening, or someone said this to me a few times, or I've snapped there, or I'm a bit tired, and this is not just a once off. And kind of thinking of those stages, where would I be at? Like, when I speak and meet my friends, am I defaulting to, oh, work is this, and I'm so busy, and I hate this, and are you enjoying it? Oh, I don't know, I'll go again. Okay, well, if I hear myself saying that, then maybe I can go and get some mentorship if I want to stay and improve that, to find the gaps. And is there something I can do? Is there someone in the organisation I can talk to about the systemic stuff? Or can I go to some therapy and talk about that and see if this is the right path? Like, I've worked with coaches who've left their sport and initially worried that I wasn't doing a good job because I didn't stay in sport. But when we really got into the nuts and bolts of stuff, they realised that they'd lost touch with the why of their involvement in sport as a coach, and just didn't know how to get out, didn't want to leave people down. They wanted to go off and explore something else. One became a dad, and that was a turning point, and they said, I can't be away for this long, I need to do this. And so I think there's a lot of different stigmas that are still around going to get help, seek help, when really it's just support. If you do it early enough and you have that kind of awareness, but sorry, again, knowing like what me at good looks like, that vibrancy. Like, I'm not saying every Tuesday night at 6:30 or every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock, you know, you want to be up in the winter time heading out to that pitch or down to that pool and being like, you know, the beacon of light. But I do think that there has to be some sort of energy that you are bringing to that group of people in front of you, or that person. So if you're not bringing that and you're not getting it from it, then what can you do?
Brilliant, thank you.
I think that since we started talking, you've shared some really good examples of or scenarios when well-being is not there. When well-being is positive and well-being is good in the sporting environment, what benefits emerge?
Happy people. Happy people, great environments. It sounds a bit utopian, but like, I think you have people who are connected, you have a buzz in the environment, you have great relationships, you have people able to maximise potential, you have people when they hit adversity have structures in place to work through it. You have people with clarity on their roles, knowing how to switch off, so better quality outside their working environment, their volunteering environment. And I don't think that that's really hard to achieve. I think people think that we get to a certain stage and things need to be more serious. Those training sessions now, because they're 15, need to be this, and we need to win this. But sitting down and having great conversations, looking forward to go into a place, the challenge of the coaching session, the interactions, the feedback, the language you use. When someone comes up and asks a question, you don't know the answer, it isn't I don't know the answer, I'm useless. It's, you know, as we've heard a million times before, how can I understand where to signpost them, or how to say, I don't know that actually, you know, and that's okay. So I think it's endless amount of benefits. If I think about it for longer, there's probably, you know, loads and loads that I can give examples of, but it's a ripple effect into society and for change as well. There's not, you know, doom and gloom of more people feeling burnt out, exhausted, undervalued. So, yeah. Yeah,
an interesting point actually, because if we're feeling burnt out when we go to coach, does that transcend into other areas of our lives? I think we had a conversation earlier on today, and I said I felt burnt out as a coach, and you asked me, did you feel burnt out as a coach or feel burnt out as a person? And I was very much actually I felt burnt out as a person through the medium of coaching, so which is really interesting. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the coach's responsibility? Is it the organisation's responsibility to get those happy people or make those people happy?
It's definitely I had an answer and then you said makes. I think the control or power dynamic, I don't think it's anyone's responsibility to make anybody happy. And that aspiration I think it's a bit ridiculous to have, where we put something in place and we expect an outcome to look a certain way, be it we run a program and there should be happy people at the end of it, or, you know, happy is just, it goes back to that kind of psychological well-being. You know, it's just a spur of the moment. That was a great experience, but I'm still going back to an environment that's stagnated and, you know, not supportive. But I think the original answer around individuals and organisations, influence where we can, control what we can. So if I look at the well-being wheel and look beyond physical to emotional well-being, financial well-being, spiritual well-being, there's loads of different areas I can tap into, know more about, know what the triggers might be and what helps me and pulls me back to a positive kind of way of working. And I think then from an organisational point of view, there is a massive big kind of white/red flag waving going, you know, help us over here, put something in place, listen to us, pause for a minute, you know, think about us, and then how, if we're in a great place, others around us are in a great place. Because essentially, if you are an organisation that wants people on a podium, or you want at grassroots level people to have a really brilliant experience, we need to have the people who are running those sessions, organising those environments, to feel like they have a sense of belonging. Back to this kind of eudaimonic, like environmental mastery, like we're working with this. I feel autonomy. I have a little bit of control here, but I feel like we're in this together and I can decide the path, and marries nicely from the personal into the professional. So it doesn't have to be this work-life balance. It can be like, in my week, what do I love doing and what do I hate or not like doing? And that's the balance. So the beautiful and lovely relationships could actually be when you go coaching, and it doesn't become something that you must do or have to go to. So that's where I love to see that we're thinking about putting people in an environment that will be a touch point for well-being, but they don't have to be the only person who solves the problems. They could be a signposter, they could be a go-to person, but it's the responsibility of everybody.
So back to the org. In fact, before we go there, and this is maybe a little bit off script, but Michael had forwarded an email on from me at one point, just when you talked about happiness in the first place there, your sign off in your email. Can you remember what it was about?
The environment.
Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe reflect on that just before we go into this next bit.
Yeah, I put that at the end, and every so often a question to see, like, because it stays on my email address.
And what does it say?
So it's happiness is the atmosphere in which all things thrive. And I put that on a couple of years ago because I genuinely believe that. I genuinely do believe that if I feel happier, I feel like I can do more, achieve more. I have the courage to kind of question and challenge things a little bit more. I put more energy into myself and feeling better about myself, etc., etc. So I put it in, but I still feel that sometimes when I'm sending emails to certain people, like, oh, how will that land with them? I'm like, I don't mind. I'm putting it in. I'm keeping it in. I'll message to somebody maybe, or make people think, or, you know. So yeah, I put that in.
Definitely, no, notice that. I like that when I saw it come through. So, talking about strategies, then, and you mentioned earlier on about a term of an organisation was put in a strategy. What are the types of things that a sporting organisation should be putting in their strategy to try and support their coaches to be well?
So I think a little bit of the example I used earlier, where they know their people. So knowing your people can go a really long way. Does that come from regular check-ins, making it your business to go to different environments? I think some people listening might be part of a massive organisation and they're like, well, that's a bit unrealistic. But there may be an opportunity for you to touch base, to drop in an email or a video or Teams, Zoom call, whatever it is, without having an agenda, or drop in a session without you coming as someone who's going to critique them. So regular check-ins. I think monitoring performance, we mentioned earlier in the burnout, but like supporting people to get super strengths and better at something. A lot of development plans and webinars or self-help, like the biggest industry in the world, is all about improving and getting better. So I think there's somewhat of a deficit lens there, that we're looking at something we're not good at to make it better. And I appreciate the angle of it, but what about what we're already good at? What about looking at something that you can be super at and building our confidence there and using that positive psychology kind of lens to keep building something? And with that, then other areas would develop. And I think there's the self-assessment. So there's around education, encouraging people to check in. So do we have the awareness? Can we have points in the season where we do this little self-assessment, this little check-in? Am I working on my best self? Am I connected? I mean, could be often all different angles what that might look like, but there could be there's lots of research using different surveys and forms, and even just pause moments in the structure of a season, that there could be moments that are encouraged by the organisation for people to stop and check in with each other. It could be a regional thing, a hub, a conference. Observing behaviours, I think, is helpful. So to know the people and to check in, you're going to be having courses and interactions, like for you to be on those with your staff or with other coaches. So it's not somebody going on a mental health and wellbeing course to represent the club. A few of you go on it, and then you sense make together, and there's time made for that. So I think like there's a personal, like smaller one-to-one environmental check-in, individual check-in, and then there's a wider connective piece. So like mentorship programs, sense making sessions that are put on and provided not as more content to observe. The education's amazing, the posters and all those things help, but they're just pick up and drop materials. I think it's the conversation, the building of the relationship helps with that feeling valued piece.
And we had conversation around coach developers or others who are supporting coaches within that environment. How is it important that we grow the provision around that and the support structures that are around coaches?
Absolutely. So vital. And I know I have a lens on this, so I'll bang this drum all day. I think coach developers are absolutely essential. The development of coaching is at the core of what you're trying to do, but you're working with the person in that environment. You're not telling them what to do. You're not telling them how to do it. You're in that environment with them as a support mechanism, building a relationship, building trust, asking them questions, letting them know that you are there to have a download. So how'd you find that session today? And then what doors does that open in the conversation? And what went into the planning? What informed that planning? Well, actually, and then gaps open up and there's no kind of feeling like there's a power dynamic in that relationship. And I just, like, I've had so many brilliant interactions with coaches where I've come away really enjoying the interaction, and they felt that it's been a really great experience. And all we've done is had a chat in a session, during a session, in a coffee shop, at a competition, and you're seeing a different kind of angle of that person each time. So I think it's the way, because then we go back to everything we've just spoke about. If that coach feels supported and there's trust being built, and in my fortunate position where I wasn't from shooting and boxing and rowing and canoeing and all that, there was no invasive technical eye. I wasn't there to critique them and feed back to the sport. I wasn't there to tell them that they're good at this and not good at that, or they've passed this or haven't passed that. It was just being present with somebody, understanding coaching and the development of coaching, so I could ask the right questions, and they then can feel supported and in a great way. And then the ripple effect is that the environment benefits. It grows the people in the environment, the athletes, etc.
No, I agree. And I think we're still building and understanding. I'm certainly trying to build a workforce around coach developer support, but I'm also finding we're still building an understanding of how coach can best use the support that's there. So I don't know if you find that as well, like understanding that, okay, that's what it is, not a tick sheet with 12 boxes that I've got to tick off. You can do this, this, and this. Actually, it's a much different role than that.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of conversations happening at the moment about what it looks like. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a program that UK Sport ran that gave me a great insight into how other people were working and validated some of the work I was doing, which was helpful to kind of know you were on the right track, whatever that track was. But it was definitely an approach that made me feel comfortable and aligned with how I would interact with somebody. Other people have different ways, and other organisations are working it a different way, and it may prove to work really beneficial to go in and assess people and do all that. I just think from looking towards like professional standards and the direction that coach development will go or is going, that there's a more holistic approach to it. There's an appreciation for the person-centred, the understanding of what their needs are, the appreciation I have and the privilege, as I mentioned, to be in their environment. It's their work, it's their space, and they're inviting me in to observe and share and notice, and it's very much a co-created space. So yeah, I think that's, but then you also get the privilege of you also get the opportunity when you're in those environments to see the well-being pieces where I've pieced together all this. So environments that have autonomy and flexibility, the coach is functioning a bit better. Environments where you have recognition and appreciation, where that coach feels valued and acknowledged and rewarded, they're functioning a little bit better and they feel a little bit happier at the job. They're open to having those conversations. They're not watching over their shoulders. So that way of working and that support from a well-being perspective from organisations can be seen dotted around. But it's an evolving space. It's absolutely brilliant to see organisations having coach developers in full-time, embedded in the environment, going around to different environments and supporting the coaches.
Definitely, no, wholeheartedly agree. You actually, just in contrast to one of the things you just mentioned there, load. How do organisations manage, the amount of things they've done in the super book that that you were involved in editing? You had a chapter specifically around coaching as a 24/7 job as a myth within that group. How do organisations think about that load, that amount of stuff that needs done, and how we manage that for coaches so that we do maintain well-being?
I mean, if I had the answer to that. I think, the book was, what a great experience that was. Like 30 authors and the gold that came out of it. Like people still saying, I've taken that book and I've brought it to somebody and they've said, oh, okay, we won't put this in, or that's a way of thinking. Like they've used it as a conversation, a vehicle for conversation. It's been great. And there is, so Brendan Cropley and Lee Baldock did a chapter on coaching as a 24/7, which as a headline in a chapter or in anywhere article that you see, people will nod along, they go, oh yeah, coaching is. But what was brilliant, and we did a end of month myths seminar. So all the authors offered their time back up for an hour at the end of each month. And the irony of that session, there was so much to fit in, they did an hour and a half. And we were saying the irony of going a half an hour over. It's absolutely gold. It's on the publisher's website, Sequoia's website, if people wanted to check it out. But they just cover so much about load in particular, of managing the expectations and being clear. So if you think about how long people have been in their role, and in some cases people didn't get a job description, or they didn't get like a role conversation. It was like, do you want to be the manager? Or, do you want to do this role? And then how much it grows over time, but you never check back in. So you're 10 years down the line, you've added 5 different roles. But I think one of the things that would be helpful is processes. And I'm not a very process-driven person, but I do think putting some processes in place makes it clear for everyone what order things can be solved in, or problems we're trying to solve in the first place, and what questions we want to ask, and how you can kind of come back to, well, this is what my core role is. This is what my 3-4 things I'm going to do, and I'm going to come back to those. So having that kind of clarity with whoever needs to have it around what my role is, how often you revisit that, month, 6 months, 12 months, end of season, pre-season, and what the priorities are going to be, and then where you give. So from an organisational point of view, if you go back to what we're saying about checking in with your people, an awareness of what the load is that they have in the first place would be a great starting point. What are they taking on? What are the resources? Where can we help? Is there something that we have already we can repurpose and give this person? Can I connect through a couple of sessions over the course of a season and just be that outlet and soundboard? Maybe that's all they need, as well as, or giving them some experience on camp so that they can feel like there's a different change of environment or a different perspective or a little bit of confidence boosting in those areas. So it isn't necessarily taking off a massive load off their back. It's that connecting to feeling valued, seen, heard, that also makes the load manageable. And then we say, well, what don't I need to do in this? And can we get some nutrition support from a university, which means I don't feel now I need to be doing courses in disordered eating, although that might be helpful for some to understand that, or more about female health. So I can kind of marry with great organisations and universities to educate myself, but also take the responsibility off. But then I'm talking there about the individual as well. So the organisation can kind of preempt and plan those and connect the dots for people. But it's a big question. And again, I don't think it's so easy for me to say, just do less. It's a bit rude of me to say that, isn't it? Do less and you'll be fine.
Definitely the considerations around, what needs to be done and how it can be done best to maintain well-being are well made there. I suppose the last one for me before I hand back across to Michael, and it again has just emerged from discussions we had. We've talked a bit about about building in ongoing processes and what could be done to support coaches in general. Decompression after like a major event, a major competition, maybe it's just a major event for the coach themselves that's happened around them. How important is that? I know I've definitely come out of coaching environments in the past in a negative place and gone into the rest of my life as a negative place. So what can we do? How important is it, and what can we do to try and support coaches around there? What difference would it make?
Yeah, I think even what you're talking about just there is so important for people to just pause and think about. There is an after, and what do you do after? So we prepare for the match, the competition, we do all the training, we then manage the game and think about how we manage, and maybe we do subs, or we think about in different sports the duration of the day, and then after, where we are churning and ruminating all these things in our head, and who are we downloading or managing expectations with. So in the new role that I have with the FA, there is a decompression project with the university research project in the pipeline to manage when the players come back from the World Cup, to support the clubs and obviously the individuals, and just be ahead of the game to what well-being and starting a new season will look like, and how can we best kind of download from that experience. And like that was something that a friend of mine and a coach developer who's working in a sport shared with me after a cycle of competition. He'd come back and deflated, and he felt like empty, and we haven't achieved this, and I wonder what about this, and all the negative thoughts floating around his head. And he said, I'm going to do, as part of the organisation, they'd put some decompression sessions and a timeline of a framework in place for him to work through. A couple of months later, he came back, reflecting on that, said it was absolutely brilliant, really helpful. I had a good structure in place, and I felt supported, and I could work through that, and I'm ready now to kind of pick myself back up and move on. But I've heard, and I'm sure I've experienced myself, as what probably we all have, coming back after a game, big game, small game, important game, whatever, and we've lost, and just processing that. What would I have done differently? Sometimes you're driving on your own in a car, it could be hours. Sometimes you're driving the bus. A friend of mine rang me after a championship game last year. He was driving the whole team home in the bus. When he got back, he was going to do the analysis. And I was like, don't do the analysis. Ring me when you get back. We'll chat about something. We'll tell jokes. No, but it's part of the perception of the 24/7. So I need to go back, do this, then the next day do analysis, and I need to do this because I don't have an analyst and I don't have this. So when is enough, and what do you need to do, and where can you delegate and get your athletes if they're able to help you in that process? But equally, what kind of process do you have at any level to come away from a Sunday morning game that you've had where 5 or 10 parents might have had a certain perception of the game? They might be very supportive, they might not be, but you have had a result and you're leaving there kind of going, I feel this and I feel that, and what are you doing? You're going back and then maybe having some time with your family and trying to get back into a normal Sunday afternoon before you go into a work week. So on both ends of the kind of experience or exposure scale, you have a great kind of opportunity to pause and think about, well, what way can I digest this experience? That's it. What emotions am I feeling? What experience did I just have there? Now what? So what? So what's next? What do I do? Do I take some, and does that inform my session during the week, or a cycle that I've planned over a big kind of season, or over a year? What part does this play? But I think the decompression stuff that I've experienced that's done at Olympic level is very impactful, and it helps then the coaches process and download from big major competitions, and then the same done with athletes.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Finally, you may be glad to hear, we've asked you so much there today, and you've given us some fantastic insight and information. Is there anything we haven't asked that might be useful to share?
I think the questions have been brilliant. I think I have more questions leaving that I'm going to write down.
Slip you the cash on the way out the door.
I did listen to a podcast the other day, which was Tim Grover was on it, and he's done a lot of work in the NBA, and he said something on it, and I think it sticks with me for a number of different reasons. I think there's some personal, and then there's obviously some work stuff that I could try and process when I'm working with coaches. And he said, winning will cost you everything but give you so much more. Every decision I made, I knew there was a cost, and I just didn't know at the time. And then he tells a real poignant story about time that wasn't spent with his daughter, and he was traveling around working with all NBA stars and more people. But then he said, if you think the price of winning is high, you should see the bill from regret. And that is the one that stuck with me. And I thought, going back to that sentiment or that statement I mentioned of saying yes and no, like what opportunities have I missed out on, and for what reason? And was I really thinking, when I'm on this conveyor belt of coaching and demands, am I thinking about all the no's I'm saying and who I'm saying to, saying them to? So yeah, it struck a chord with me, the bill for regret. And, you know, when people, if there's coaches that are in kind of that static position at the moment and don't want to quit because they love the sport, can you get support from somewhere? Can you ask the organizations, can you check in with people, see what's going on, see what you're doing, do a little health check or diagnostic, but also in your own environment, like what do you really want out of life? This is a long coaching career, and what are the kind of non-negotiables to keep you happy in that environment and functioning well?
I think that is a fantastic place to leave it there. I love that. Jenny, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your insight. It's fantastic to speak to you. It's been very easy to conduct this podcast with you. I just thank you so much for taking the time to engage with the Curious Coaching podcast.
Thanks so much.
Yep, thanks, Jenny.
Curious Coaching is brought to you by Sport Northern Ireland. We hope that this episode has sparked some curiosity for you and your coaching. The future belongs to the curious.